Any parting advice for before the end of our interview for the journalism student?
I think it's wonderful. If I didn't do what I do in my life, I would want to be a journalist. I mean, I consider myself a journalist to some extent. I assign myself a story. I say, is the Washington Post Company worth $22 a share in 1973? I say, you know, is the BNSF Railroad worth us paying $34 billion? I assign myself the story. It's my working hypothesis that it is, but then I go and look for the facts, and I try not to be selective about the facts that I use as input. So journalism, it's fascinating. You know, I love it. I would say that A, you should always observe that rule about not letting the hypothesis determine the story. B, you've got to learn. You've got to learn about accounting. You've got to learn about how business works if we're talking about business journalism. And you can always get smarter. And if you do the right kind of a job, you will attract the right kind of sources. I mean, you know, I am a source for certain journalists, and the reason I am is because I admire their work, and you know, the others get no place with me. So it's very important to, if you want to become a great journalist, you know, to behave like one as you go along, and then all the other pieces will fall into place. And you want to have a curiosity about business. You know, there are so many good stories that haven't been written yet, a few of them which I know. And so it is, you couldn't be working in a better area. And there's always going to be business. Business is always going to be important to the body politic as well as be interesting to a lot of readers. And if there are so few that are good, that you're going to stand out if you really work at it. The biggest sin in journalism that I see, and I think, incidentally, I think I probably, as a CEO, have spent more time talking to journalists than perhaps any CEO in the country. Partly that's because I'm 84, but partly because I like to talk to journalists too. But the greatest sin they commit, you've got to start a story with a hypothesis. I mean, you're looking into something because you have a working hypothesis, but you have to give up that hypothesis if it turns out not to be correct, or if it's misleading in a major way. So I always worry about the journalist that calls me. They've decided what story they're working on, and all they're looking for is confirmatory evidence. So I call it quote shopping. They'll talk to me for 45 minutes hoping they get one quote that confirms their story, and ignoring the other 43 minutes when I tell them things that should limit the story. So it's very natural. You know, you get time invested in it, you've got this working hypothesis, you know, terrible what Walmart does with their employees or whatever it may be, and you may have some people who have an interest in it feeding you a lot of material along that line. And once you've invested a lot of hours and your editor knows you've invested a lot of hours, maybe it was the editor's working hypothesis to start with. Now you got to go back and tell him he's wrong, or her. I mean, there's a lot of momentum toward a bad story. There's a lot of momentum toward a good story too. But you have to be able as a writer to say, my hypothesis is no longer correct. And all it was a hypothesis. That's no sin to say that, but it's hard to do.
Then the community people at church mostly would encourage us, child, get an education, and you can get out of this hot sun. You can find better work. So that was the drama. It actually, growing up, was a better drama than we saw in the movies. The Help, 12 Years as a Slave. None of those movies could depict accurately enough the kind of drama that we experienced growing up. There were so many dimensions of it. I said, so many stories have been told, and yet there are many more stories yet to be told.
In 2008, the Washington Post said that you were one of the world's best CEOs. 7 years later, are you even better?
You've never really led until you've been through like a really, really tail risk, flying close to the sun, right? So now, they don't love you when that's happening, right? You know, in other words, when you're in the middle of the crisis, you don't understand you're getting better. And believe me, the people that are investing in you are a little bit hacked off, right? But there's no doubt in my mind, when I talk to other leaders, no matter where they're from, the fact that you've been through a crisis, and if you're a learner, which I hope I am, or which I think our company is, you get better. And so I'm 100 times, you know, I always say this about looking at people. You never tell anything about anybody when things are good. You can only tell about people when it's like 15 minutes till midnight and it's crappy outside and there's horrible things happening. Then you can tell who's good and who's bad and who can make it and who can't. And I think in my own case, I've learned from all the things that have happened over time and just hopefully become better, try to become better.